Hello, it's Chino here. If you like chess openings, you're in the right place. Today I'd like to show you a trap in the Caro-Kann defense and also an identical trap in the London system. Curious, huh? Well, let's see how this turns out. So e4, um, yeah, king's pawn move. C6, signifying black wants to play the Caro-Kann. And after d4, d5. Now, there are many responses for black, well, I say black for white in this position, but one of the more popular ones and my favorite move in this position is the advanced variation with pawn to e5. And here, black has two very popular continuations. So the first is pawn to c5, but by far the more popular of the two moves is bishop to f5. And this is a critical point in the opening because white can play this cunning move, pawn to h4. Now, to the unobservant player, this move, on the h file doesn't look like it's doing anything, but in fact, it has a hidden trap. Now, in this position, the mistake that black would make here would be to play the move pawn to e6, which is a natural continuation after a move like bishop to f5. Now, the reason this is a bad move is because of the response pawn to g4, and all of a sudden the bishop is trapped. In fact, if I just take this back one move, this position actually happened in an open tournament in a game between Kumaran and Nguyen in 2014 in Chennai. And the player of the black pieces in Nguyen was rated 2000, over 2,400 and missed this trap. Fortunately for him, Kumaran missed a strong reply pawn to g4 and played bishop to d3 instead, and went on to lose with the white pieces in about 58 moves. Just going back to the position, the critical position, g4 would have been the key move in the position. The point being the bishop has nowhere to go. For example, bishop to e4 would be met by pawn to f3, and it's obvious the bishop can't go back to g6 because of the move pawn to h5. So yeah, a seemingly innocuous move with pawn to h4, and the poor response pawn to e6 has led to the bishop being trapped. Now, for those of you who play the Caro-Kann, you probably want to hang on because I'm going to show you the better responses for black in that position. So if we just go back to the key position after this funny move with pawn to h4, or trappy move with pawn to h4, um, there are several options for black in this position. Knight d7 is a move. Queen to b7 to b6 is another move. But by far the more popular ones, or the one recommended by theory, is the move pawn to h5. So already this takes away, any ideas of f3 and g4. If we take that move back, it's also worth pointing out here that pawn to h6 would also be a reasonable move for black, because yeah, this bishop would have an escape square on h7 if white were to try f3 and g4, which would be inadvisable. So yeah, that was a fun trap in the Caro-Kann. Curiously, there's a very identical trap in the London system, this time with the black pieces. So black gets to trap the bishop, the white bishop in the London system, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so looking at the opening moves in the London system after pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and bishop to f4, it's just worth pointing out here that this is a very popular opening, both in blitz and even in serious tournament games. I mean, the world champion Magnus Carlsen has been known to essay this move even in serious games. Now, there are several responses for black in this position, um, but there's a curious one, um, identical to the position we saw in the Caro-Kann defense, and that's after the move pawn to h5. Now, for those of you who remember the lesson from the previous position, you would quickly note that pawn to e3 is a blunder by white, and the reason is that this bishop gets trapped. So black would usually play this move pawn to e5 first, and you can put an exclamation mark against that. And the point of this is that if pawn takes e5, well, pawn to g5, and we quickly see that this bishop gets trapped. I mean, the bishop has only one square, and if bishop to g3, h4, and the bishop is well and truly trapped. Just taking back a few moves, so if we go back to the position after pawn to e5, instead of pawn takes e5, white could try bishop takes e5, but yeah, this doesn't help because of the move pawn to f6, and yeah, again that bishop is trapped. If the bishop goes to g3, we got this move, and pawn to h4, and if bishop to f4 does this move, and pawn to pawn to g5. So yeah, so this as you can see is a very identical position to the one we saw in the Caro-Kann. However, I have to point out though, if we go back to the key position after pawn to h5, setting the trap, in this position, it's not a great move for black if white displayed a simple knight to f3 or even pawn to c4. In fact, white would have a come out the opening with a better position. The reverse is true though in the Caro-Kann, where after white sets the trap with pawn to h4, even if black were to avoid it, white would still have an equal position. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this fun traps in the opening. Feel free to try them in blitz games, maybe even in the odd club game, particularly with the Caro-Kann trap. And yeah, let me know in the comments how you get on. And yeah, I hope to see you on the next one.